The topic of my presentation is how to design a questionnaire in research. So, as you all know, collection of data is very important as far as research is concerned. So, we can say that the heart of any research design is the collection of data. And you all know that there are two sources of data. Primary data and secondary data are the two important sources of data. And secondary data, as far as primary data is concerned, the researcher is collecting primary data for the first time. However, in the case of secondary data, the researcher is using the data that has already been collected by somebody else. So, in the case of primary data, for collecting primary data, the respondents have to conduct field surveys. And questionnaire is the most important tool used for collecting data. So it is one of the most important research instrument used for collecting primary data. And we all know that questionnaires are widely used in surveys to collect data about people, their preferences, their thoughts, their behavior in a systematic manner. And as far as quantitative research is concerned, using questionnaire, that has become very popular. It has become a very popular method. For collecting qualitative information also, we can use questionnaire. However, for collecting quantitative information, we always require a questionnaire. The research instrument questionnaire was invented by Sir Francis Galton, and we can say that it is a research instrument consisting of a set of questions intended to capture the responses from the respondents in a standardized manner. So, respondents in a questionnaire, the respondents are expected to write down their answers in the space meant for that purpose. So, the research investigator sends the questionnaire, and the respondents are expected to write down their answers in the space meant for them. Space will be provided for the respondents to answer their questions or to record their responses. The questionnaire is used to collect data from large and widely scattered group of people. Most often, we use the tool of questionnaire to collect information if the respondents are very large, they are widely scattered. And usually, we mail questionnaires to the respondents, or sometimes we may be administering the questionnaire to the respondents by giving them appropriate forms and collecting them later. If we are mailing questionnaires, the respondents have to send the questionnaire back after filling up the questionnaire. And you must distinguish between questionnaire and interview schedule. In the case of social science research, sometimes we may be using interview schedule and we may not be using questionnaire. So you should be clear about what is the difference between a questionnaire and an interview schedule. So interview schedule is also a pro forma containing a set of questions, and the schedules are filled in by the interviewer at the time of personal interview. In the case of questionnaire, we are sending the questionnaire. The investigator is sending the questionnaire to the respondents, and respondents have to fill up the questionnaire. However, in the case of interview schedule, the interviewer is meeting the respondents personally. He may be conducting a face-to-face interview, and the interviewer himself fills up the schedule. Interviewer asks the questions to the respondents, and finally, the interviewer himself fills up the interview schedule. That is the difference between interview schedule and questionnaire. Both questionnaire and schedule are similar as far as wordings of the questions are concerned. They are similar. However, the person who writes in a questionnaire is the respondent, and the person who writes in an interview schedule is the interviewer himself. So most often in social science research, we may use interview schedule, because if we are using interview schedule, we can directly meet the respondent, and we can understand the socioeconomic background of the respondent. And apart from direct answers to the questions, we can obtain many kinds of information about the respondent. We can understand his feelings, his attitude, etc., from direct personal interview. So there is no structural difference between interview schedule and a questionnaire. Only difference is that in the case of a questionnaire, the respondent himself answers. We may be mailing that questionnaire. There is no, sometimes there may not be any direct interaction between the interviewer and the respondent. However, in the case of an interview schedule, it will be same as the questionnaire. However, the interviewer writes down answers. Interviewer asks questions to the respondent, and he himself writes down the answers. So schedule is also a pro forma containing the set of questions. However, schedules are filled in by the interviewer at the time of personal interview. And interviewers meet the respondents with the schedules and ask them questions about the schedule, and verbal responses of the respondents are recorded in the space meant for it in the schedule. That is the only difference. Now, before going into the details of the questionnaire, let us have an understanding about different kinds of data collection methods. There are different, you may be knowing that there are different kinds of data collection methods. Sometimes we may be mailing questionnaires, sometimes we may be going for direct personal interview, and we can go for a telephone interview. And recently, interviewers conduct online web surveys also. And in the COVID period, with the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, most often researchers are using this method. Online web surveys are used. So as compared to other methods, online web surveys are inexpensive to administer, and results can be instantly recorded in online databases. And however, during certain situations, we cannot use online or web surveys, because if respondents are very poor, illiterate, or senior citizens or migrants, we cannot use web surveys, because they require internet facility, they require computer facility, and for poor people or senior citizens, they may not be able to respond themselves. They may need the help of others. So during certain situations, that depends on the type of respondents. So if we are collecting information from very poor people or illiterate people or senior citizens or migrants, we cannot use this method. However, with the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, this has become a very popular method of data collection. So if we are going for a direct personal interview, we can use an interview schedule. However, if we are mailing questionnaires, we have to use the questionnaire itself. We cannot directly meet the respondent. So depending upon the kind of data collection method that we use, we have to either use questionnaires or interview schedules. There are different types of questionnaires. First is structured questionnaires, second is semi-structured questionnaire, and third is unstructured questionnaires. In the case of structured questionnaires, most often it will contain closed questions with predefined answers. Closed questions means predefined answers. All options will be given, and the respondents have to select their option. So in a structured questionnaire, see, all the questions will have predefined answers. The respondent has to select his answer. In the case of semi-structured questionnaire, that will be a mixture of closed and open-ended questions. The use of semi-structured questionnaire enables mix of qualitative and quantitative information to be gathered. In the case of uh, inquiries where we require both qualitative and quantitative information, we can use semi-structured questionnaires because it contains a mixture of closed and open-ended questions. In the case of closed questions, the respondents can select their options, and in the case of open-ended questions, they can write their own answers. They can express their answers. And the type of questionnaire is unstructured questionnaire. Here, in the case of unstructured questionnaire, even new questions which have not been scripted can be asked. The interviewer can ask even new questions. In the case of television shows and all, interviewers may be using unstructured questionnaires. They might have listed a set of questions. However, depending upon the circumstance, the interviewer can ask new questions also. So the unstructured questions can elicit free responses, and highly useful. So if the researcher wants to analyze data statistically and to test the hypothesis, a formal standardized questionnaire is to be designed. So if a researcher wants to analyze data, but if he is in need of quantitative information, and if he wants to analyze this quantitative information with the help of statistical tools, and if he has to test the hypothesis, then a formal standardized questionnaire is to be designed. So we can say that designing questionnaire is an art. So designing a standardized questionnaire, that has become an art, and whenever you design a questionnaire, you have to remember that it must serve as a standard guide for all interviewers. In the case of large inquiries, the principal investigator or the researcher himself will not be able to interview everybody. So he may be seeking help from many investigators. So if one particular researcher is engaging 10 investigators to collect information from a group of people, then the questionnaire must serve as a standard guide for all these interviewers. And it must serve as a standard guide for all the respondents. It must be the same for all interviewers and all respondents. So designing such a questionnaire is a very difficult task, and all questions are to be framed in exactly the same way, and they must be given in the same order. So while designing a questionnaire, we must understand that it must serve as a standard guide for all the interviewers and all respondents. So we have to frame all questions in exactly the same way, and they must be given in the same order. And here it is important to remember that there is no hard and fast rules about designing a questionnaire. And however, there are a large number of points that can be borne in mind. There are many tips for designing a very good questionnaire, but you have to remember that there is no hard and fast rule about designing a questionnaire. Depending upon the research topic, or depending upon the objectives, or depending upon the discipline to which you belong to, there may be variations in designing a questionnaire. However, it is very important to remember some points while designing a questionnaire. So, while designing a questionnaire, we have to remember that a well-designed questionnaire should be suitable to meet the research objectives. So, adequate preparatory work is essential. This is very important. When we come to the stage of designing questionnaires, we have to look at our synopsis or the research proposal that we have already submitted, and we have to examine the research problem as well as the major research objectives. So we have to achieve those research objectives. So a well-designed questionnaire should be suitable to achieve or meet the research objectives. So a lot of preparatory work is essential. So, first of all, you have to understand the problem thoroughly. You have to formulate research questions as well as research objectives. Then you have to design the questionnaire in such a way that it is the most appropriate to meet the research objectives. You have to remember that a good questionnaire must aim at encouraging respondents to provide accurate, unbiased, and complete information. So this is also very important. A good questionnaire must aim at encouraging or motivating the respondents to provide accurate, unbiased, and complete information. So a researcher always requires accurate, unbiased, and complete information. So you have to design the questionnaire in such a manner that it must encourage the respondents to provide very precise and unbiased information. So before designing the questionnaires, you have to keep all these points in mind. Now let us examine what are the essential features of a good questionnaire. So the first thing that you have to remember is that there must be clarity. The questionnaire must be very clear. There must be clarity. All words and all sentences and all questions must be very clear. There should be clarity, and it should be as brief as possible. It should be as brief as possible. So clarity, brevity, and unambiguity. It should be unambiguous. So that is another point. It should be reliable. A good questionnaire must be reliable, and communicability is another thing. So while designing the questionnaire, you have to remember that all the questions must be very clear. It should be as brief as possible. There should not be any ambiguity. It must be very reliable, and the communicability must be very high. So the general form, content of questions, question sequencing, question formulating, and wordings, all are very important. And you must remember that all these have serious consequences for the survey, particularly the results. So you have to be very careful about the general form of the questionnaire, the content of questions, then sequencing of questions. That is also very important. Similarly, the formulation of questions and the words that we use to frame questions. All these are very important, and all these can have serious consequences for the survey. So we must be very careful while designing the questionnaire. Now let us examine the process of designing a questionnaire. In the process of designing a questionnaire, there are many steps. You must be familiar with all these steps before go through all these steps. So first, we have to decide, the researcher himself or the interviewer or the principal investigator has to decide what information is required. So before designing or before starting the preparation of the questionnaire, you have to decide, the researcher himself has to decide what all information are required. So as I have already mentioned, He has to go through the proposal and he has to understand the research problem thoroughly. He has to review the literature, and he has to properly frame the research questions as well as the objectives. And he has to consider what all information are required for achieving the research objectives. So without having a proper understanding of the research problem, or without having a comprehensive literature review, or without framing our objectives properly, never start the preparation of a questionnaire. So first of all, we have to decide what all information are required. So that is the first step. Then we have to define the target respondents, and we have to select the method of reaching them. So after deciding what kind of information are required for achieving the goals of research, we have to define the target respondents. We have to understand, or we have to find out who are the target respondents, who are going to, from whom are we going to collect information. So we have to identify the target respondents, and also we have to select the method of reaching them, how we are collecting information from them, what kind of data collection method is required for collecting information from the target respondents. So that we have to define. So the way in which that we frame questions, that depends upon the target respondents. See, if we are collecting information from doctors, the way in which we ask questions, that will be different from the way in which we ask questions to migrant laborers. So we have to define the target respondents, from whom are we collecting data. So that is very important. And similarly, in what way, or in which method is used for collecting information. Are we mailing? Are we sending questionnaires by post? Or are we going to directly meet these respondents and collect information? And whether we are going for online survey, that we have to decide. Depending upon the type of data collection method, the questions will also differ. So we have to decide how we are collecting information. That is the second step. Then we have to decide what type of questionnaire should be used, whether we have to use a structured questionnaire, completely structured questionnaire, in which we are giving predefined answers. We are giving various options for each and every question, or whether we are using semi-structured questionnaire in which we are giving options to certain questions, and some questions are open-ended, in which the respondents are free to write their responses, or whether we are going for completely unstructured questionnaires. So that also we have to decide. Most often researchers, those who are doing PhD work and all, may be using structured or semi-structured questionnaires, because most often we may be in need of both qualitative and quantitative information, particularly quantitative information. So we have to go with structured or semi-structured questionnaires. So as a third step, we have to decide what kind of questionnaire, what type of questionnaire should be used. The next step is we have to decide the content, and we have to prepare the draft. What all questions are required for meeting our objectives? So we have to decide the contents. We have to write down the questions, prepare as a list of questions, then again examine whether we can achieve our objectives, or we can meet the research questions by using the information provided by the respondents to these questions. So we can make corrections, we can delete some questions, we can add some new questions. So we have to decide the content and prepare the first draft. So if we are doing PhD and all, we cannot go with the first draft. We have to make corrections, 2-3 corrections. So then we have to, the fifth step is to develop a response format also. If we are using structured or semi-structured type of questionnaires, we have to develop a response format also. We have to, for various questions, we have to examine what are the probable answers. So we have to write down all these options, and we have to develop a response format also. And then after developing a response format also, then we can arrange the questions in the appropriate sequential ordering. So it is very important to arrange the questions in a very appropriately. The question sequencing, that is very important. So we can arrange the questions in a sequential manner, and then we can read all the questions and the respondents. Then we can again make corrections, rearrange the questions. After that, so after rearranging all the questions and after arriving at an appropriate sequential ordering, we can pre-test and revise questions. Pre-testing is also very important. Particularly for research scholars, pre-testing is very important. So by using the questionnaire, we can reach some respondents, and we can ask them questions. We can pre-test the questionnaire, and once we write down the responses, or once we collect the responses, we can understand what are the defects of our already prepared questionnaire. So pre-testing is very important. So after collecting information from a few respondents, you can see you can understand the defects of your, or the limitations of your questionnaire. You can revise the questions. So pre-testing is very important. And after revising the questions, you can edit the questionnaire again, and you can specify the procedures for its use in the final survey form. So if you are seeking help from investigators, then you have to specify the procedures. In a standard questionnaire, you have to give some instructions also, instructions to the interviewers or instructions to the respondents. That is also important. So you can edit the questionnaire and specify all the instructions, and you can develop the final survey form. These are the important steps involved in the process of designing a questionnaire. You should remember that all these steps are very important. You should not skip any of these steps, and most often research scholars fail to remember that the first 2-3 steps are very important. We have to do all these steps while designing a questionnaire. You must be familiar with all the steps involved in designing a questionnaire. Now, coming to the questionnaire, what are the subsections in a questionnaire? See, depending upon the topic of research, or depending upon the discipline to which you belong to, there may be slight variations in subsections depending upon the purpose for which you are preparing the questionnaire. There may be some variations in subsections. This is the general division of a questionnaire into subsections. The first subsection is respondents' identification data. That is, you have to ask the name of the respondent, address, date of interview, the name of the interviewer. This is not compulsory. Name of the respondent and address are all not compulsory in all types of research. In order to identify the response sheet, you can write down the name of the respondent or address. If the respondent all those things, then you can write down the name of the respondent, address, then date of interview and time of name of the interviewer, that they are very important in the case of research projects or some funded research work and all. In the case of PhD research work, date of interview or name of the interviewer may be very important. So, depending upon the type of inquiry, there may be some variations. However, respondents identification data, the first subsection may be respondents identification data. Then introduction. Introduction is the second step. Then in the introduction part, you can write down a request for help. Interviewers or the researchers request for help that can be given as an introduction part. That is also optional. Then instructions, that is very important. All necessary information required by the interviewer and the respondent need to be given. In the questionnaire, you have to give necessary information required by the interviewer and the respondent. That must be given. Proper instructions must be given in the questionnaire. And the next section is information part. Main body of the document made up of all questions and response code. That means the question part and questions and responses. If we are giving predefined answers or if we are giving options A, B, C type of options, then that is also that must also be given. So information part, the part where the respondents are giving information. Then we have classification of data. That part in certain questionnaires, that part will also be there. That is questions usually given at the front or at the end of the questionnaire to establish important characteristic of the respondent, particularly related to demographic, age of the respondent, the sex of the respondent. Similarly, that kind of information, which are usually that is given at the beginning of the questionnaire, and in some questionnaires it may be given at the end. So depending upon the type of inquiry, these are the possible subsections in a questionnaire. In certain questionnaires, one or two subsections may not be there. So these are the possible subsections in a questionnaire. Then classification of questions. Broadly, we can classify questions into three types. These are the classifications: closed questions, open-ended questions, and open response option questions. First, let us examine what is meant by closed questions. Closed questions, in the case of closed questions, we have some fixed responses. So closed questions are fixed response questions. This is very easy as far as the respondent is concerned, because all options are given to each question. In the case of closed questions, to that particular question, responses will also be given by the investigator or the researcher. So it is very easy for the respondent to indicate the answer, because all options are there. He has to select his option. So respondent does not have to think about how to articulate his answer. Most often when we collect data regarding income, various classes or various categories may be given. So he has to tick, the respondent has to tick his income. So otherwise, sometimes if we are asking for the age of the respondent in different categories, then 20 to 30 group. Then if the respondent belong to the age group of 20 to 30, he has to tick that. So all options are there. Then it is very easy for the respondent to indicate his answer. In the case of closed questions, the researcher himself give options. So fixed response questions, they are all fixed response questions. So respondent does not have to think about how to articulate his answer. Only thing that he has to do is to select his answer. In the case of open-ended questions, second classification is open-ended questions. In the as far as open-ended questions are concerned, fixed responses are not available. There may not be any fixed response. So respondents have to provide the response in their own words about their feelings, perceptions, attitudes, etc., etc. So for open-ended questions, the respondents themselves have to uh, write down the response. So in their own words, the options will not be there. The respondent, the person who is giving the information, he has to write down his answer. And the third type of third category is open response option questions. Open response option questions. Here, there will be some fixed responses. Fixed responses or options will be there, and apart from those options, another option will be there. Others. For example, what is your religion? Then Hindu, Christian, Muslim. Then another option, others. Then you can write specify. Then the respondent has to specify the religion. So that kind of questions will be there. So along with the fixed responses or along with the options, the respondents have an option to write down other option also. So others will be given. Then he can tick others and he can write down the category or write down his answer if if space is provided to them. So in the case of open response option questions, the investigator or the researcher can give options, and he is giving an opportunity for the respondent to answer his own or to write down his own views also. If he's not ready to select the given responses, he has the option to indicate his answer. So others column or other there may be there will be another others category, and the respondent has to specify the answer. So these are the important classification, important categories of questions. Then let us examine response formats. So responses to structured questions will be in one of the following formats. Dichotomous responses can be there. So respondents have to select one of the two possible choices. Two choices will be given, two options will be given. In the case of dichotomous responses, two responses will be given. So from the two available choices, respondents have to select one. So true or false options will be there. So respondents have to select their answer. Either they can tick true or false. Yes or no questions. There are only two options are there. In the case of dichotomous questions, only two options will be there, agree or disagree. So from the two options, the respondents have to select their option. Then nominal responses. So here, in the case of nominal responses, the respondents are presented with more than two unordered options. There will not be any ordering as far as options are concerned. So respondents can select any choice. See, for example, where are you employed? Then there are many options: manufacturing, consumer services, education, healthcare, tourism, and others. So there are many options. All these options are unordered also. There is no ordering. There is no ranking. So the respondent is free to select any answer. So if you are employed in education sector, you can select education, or if you are employed in healthcare sector, you can select that. So now this is nominal response. In the case of dichotomous response format, only two options will be there. He has to select either one response from the two responses available. In the case of nominal responses, many responses will be there and there is no ordering also. So the respondent has to select his choice. The third format is ordinal responses. Here, respondents have more than two ordered options. For example, here the important thing that you have to notice that the options are ordered options. So some kind of ranking is there. So what is your highest level of education? Then options are high school, +2, graduation, post-graduation. So the second option, +2 is higher. It's a higher option. Graduation, that is a still higher option. Post-graduation, that's another still higher option. So the respondent has to select the option. If his educational qualification is +2, he has to select that. So in the case of ordinal responses, there are ordered options. Interval level responses. Respondents are presented with a 5-point or a 7-point Likert scale. Agrees. For example, to a particular question, the options will be agree, strongly agree, not sure, disagree, strongly disagree. All these 5 answers will be there. So the respondent has to select his choice. In the case of continuous ratio scale responses, that is the 5th type of response format. So in the case of ratio scale responses, the responses generally tend to be the fill in the blanks type, age. So age of the respondent. So you can write down that, or tenure in the firm. So 5 years or 6 years, that you can write down. So these are the important response formats. Then coming to the question content of questions. See, most often, there are different categories of questions, and sometimes the content may be aimed mainly at ascertaining facts. So we may be, the researcher or the interviewer may be trying to ascertain facts. So questions about person's age, education, religion, income, nationality, marital status, occupation, etc. All these type of questions come under this category. So we are just trying to obtain facts about the respondent. What is the age of the person? What is the educational qualification, religion, income, nationality, etc., etc. See, sometimes we may be trying to the question may be aimed mainly at ascertaining beliefs about what the facts are. See, for example, the investigator can ask a respondent to indicate whether child marriages are taking place in spite of the Child Marriage Restraint Act. So here the investigator is trying to learn what people believe to be the facts. There is Child Marriage Restraint Act, then still, do you think that child marriages are taking place in spite of this act? So we are trying to examine the respondents' beliefs about facts. So it is a fact that there is a Child Marriage Restraint Act. However, we are the investigator or the researcher is trying to examine the respondent's belief about the fact. Then another is content aimed mainly at ascertaining feelings like fear, contempt, hate, envy, or sympathy. So we may be trying to understand, the researcher may be trying to understand the feelings or attitudes of the respondent. Then content aimed mainly at conscious reasons for beliefs and feelings. So see, we can understand what is the major reason for the respondents, a particular kind of belief or a feeling. So investigator examines why this why this kind of particular feeling or belief is there, what is the reason for that. So see, questions may may be of any of these type. Then you have to remember that responses obtained in a survey research are very sensitive to the type of questions that we ask. So the type of questions that we ask, that is very important, and responses most often depend upon the type of questions that we ask. Poorly framed or ambiguous questions will likely to result in meaningless responses with very little value. So for creating a good questionnaire, there are many aspects which must be taken care of, and each question, so before going for field investigation, the researcher, particularly PhD students, they have to carefully scrutinize each and every question. So, so while designing the questionnaire, first you have to think about different aspects of the research problem. I have already mentioned that. Then think about the objectives of the survey. Think about the how the interview will be carried out. Uh, think about the introduction to the questionnaire. Think about formatting. Then think about questions from the respondent's point of view. This is very important. See, when you draft the questionnaire, see, you have already studied the research problem, you have framed the research questions, you have specified the research objectives or major objectives. So you are much familiar with the topic. You see, after doing 1 or 2 years of research, you may be going to the field. So you are very much familiar with that area, the topic, research problem, questions, research objectives, all. However, you should remember that the respondent may not be aware of all these. So whenever you draft a questionnaire, you have to think about questions from the respondent's point of view. You must remember, you must try to view questions from the respondent's point of view. First, you must think that you are the respondent. You do not know anything about the research problem. Then how is this question? See, what will be the reaction of the respondent to this question? You must examine whether the respondent may be able to understand the meaning of this question, how the respondent may understand the question. So you have to think about questions from the respondent's point of view. Then you can discuss the questions with some of your friends or your teachers. Then you can understand how they think about the question. So try to understanding questions from the respondent's point of view, that is very important. Then think about the possible answers at the same time as thinking about questions. While you frame the questions, you have to think about possible answers also. That is also very important. And when you think about questions from the point of view of the respondent, then that is also very important while writing down the possible answers also. So if you are conducting an inquiry regarding the socio-economic conditions of some marginalized segments, then see the questions, say most of the respondents may be illiterate, they may not be able to understand the meaning of many questions. So while drafting the questions, you have to understand the background of the respondents, so how they will be able to understand the questions, that you have to think about that. Then think about the order of questions also. See, all these are very important while designing the for designing the questionnaire effectively. Then as I mentioned, you have to scrutinize each and every question. You have to examine is the question whether the question is clear and understandable. So see, after examining each question, you have to check whether the question is clear and understandable. So questions should be simple. I have already mentioned that it must be very simple, it must be clear, and preferably it must be asked in active voice. Passive voice should not be used, and without any complicated words or technical jargon that may not be understood by a typical respondent. See, you should not use any complicated word or a technical word. So it must be very clear, simple. You will be able to understand that. The only exception is if the survey is targeted at a specialized group. See, for example, if you are collecting information from doctors or lawyers or researchers, then you can use technical terms that they usually use. Otherwise, you have to use very simple words, and also you have to ensure that all questions in the questionnaire are worded in a similar manner to make it easy for the respondents to read and understand them. So that is very important. Then you have to check whether the question is worded in a negative manner or ambiguous. Negatively worded questions should not be used. In all cases, avoid double negatives. Negatively worded questions should not be used. Which are ambiguous must be avoided. See, for example, if you are asking a respondent, what is your income? Very clear whether you are referring to annual income or monthly income or family income or personal income. So, or you have to specify whether you are asking monthly income or total family income or an individual's income. That must be specified. So that is very important. Otherwise, that will lead to different kinds of interpretations by different respondents. Some people may be writing annual income, some people may be giving monthly income, then somebody may be writing family income. So such kind of ambiguity should be avoided. So you have to specify, you have to clearly specify what you are asking. Then see, the question should not be biased. So the researcher has to check whether the question encourages the respondents to answer in a certain way. We should not ask any bias. So researchers' bias should not be reflected in the questions. So a biased language or tone tend to skew observed responses. So survey questions should be carefully scrutinized to avoid biased language. Researchers' bias should not be there in framing the questions, and the whole of research work should be done in such a way that your biases should not enter into the research work. So that is very important. Then is the question double barrel? Double barrel questions are those which can have multiple answers. You have to avoid questions which can have multiple answers. See, for example, I have given an example. See, see, this is the question. Are you satisfied with the hardware and software provided in your work, for your work? You may be satisfied with the hardware, but you may not be satisfied with the software. So you should not ask questions like this. Are you satisfied with hardware and software provided for the work? So first you have to ask, are you satisfied with the hardware provided? Then, are you satisfied with the software? Double barrel questions should not be used. So that is very important. Then, is the question too general? The questions that are too general may not accurately convey respondents' perceptions. You have to ask specific questions. So, see, for example, if you are asking, how big is your firm? If the respondent is working in a firm, and if you are asking, how big is your firm? Then that may be interpreted differently by different respondents. See, you have to specify, you have to ask the question specifically. Ask how many people work for your firm. So how many people are working in your firm? So you will get an idea about the size of that firm. Or what is the annual revenue of your firm? So by understanding the annual revenue also, you can have an idea about the size of the firm. So both these are measures of size, number of people working in a firm, or annual revenue of the firm. So you will get an idea about the size of the firm by asking these questions. So never ask questions which are too general. Try to ask specific questions. Then is the question too detailed? Avoid unnecessarily detailed questions that serve no specific research purpose. You should not ask very detailed questions which serve no specific purpose. For example, if you are conducting a household survey, you just want to know about the number of children in that household. Then you can ask the age of each and every child in the household. Then you can ask the class in which each and every child is studying. So if that is not necessary, if you do not require such kind of information for meeting your objectives, avoid that kind of details. There is no meaning in asking all these questions. Then you have to examine whether the question is presumptuous. Avoid questions like this: in your opinion, what are the benefits of a tax cut? Here you are presuming that the respondents see the tax cut as beneficial. So avoid such kind of questions. Avoid questions with built-in presumptions. So that is very important. Then you have to check whether the question is imaginary. Never ask imaginary questions. If you become the prime minister, or if you become the chief minister, what will you do? Such kind of questions should be avoided. Never ask hypothetical or imaginary questions. That is very important. Then then question sequencing. I have already mentioned that sequencing of questions, that is very important. Questions should follow, questions should flow logically from one to the next, and we should move from the least sensitive to the most sensitive, from factual to the behavioral, and from behavioral to the attitudinal questions, and from more general to the specific questions. So this is very important. When you start the survey, you should not ask a very difficult question. So you have to ask very simple questions initially. Then you should not ask any very sensitive questions at the beginning. So initially ask simple questions or least sensitive questions, and then move to more sensitive or difficult questions. There are some general rules for question sequencing also. Start with easy questions like age, gender, or education level. And so easy questions like what is your age, then what is your level of education. So all these questions can be asked initially. And if the researcher is following a historical sequence of events, follow the chronological order from earliest to the latest. So such kind of sequencing is always good. And ask about one topic at a time. So if you are asking about one topic, ask about that topic at that time, and then you move to the other questions. And sequencing is very important. See, if you are meeting a lady in a household, if the researcher is collecting information from a lady, and initially he asks, how many children do you have? Then he asks, are you married? Then do you have children? That kind of sequencing is not proper. So first you have to ask, are you married? Do you have children? Then ask how many children you have. Such kind of sequencing is very important. Then while switching topics, use transition words such as the next section examines your opinions about. So using transition words, that is good. That may be useful, that may be helpful for the respondent. And use filter or contingency questions as needed, such as if you have answered yes to question number 5, then please proceed to section 2. If you answered no go to section 3. Such kind of instructions may be useful in a questionnaire. Then always attentive and appreciative of respondents' time, attention, trust, confidentiality of personal information. So always remember that the respondents' time or other people's time is very valuable. So never waste their time. So try to be as brief as possible. So at the same time, you have to collect as much as information as possible. So you should be very careful while drafting the questionnaire and while interviewing the respondent. Keep your survey as short as possible and limit it to what is absolutely necessary. This is very important, and you must remember that longer surveys tend to dramatically lower response rate. So you have to keep your survey as short as, keep your questionnaire as short as possible by avoiding all unnecessary questions. So you have to limit it to what is absolutely necessary, and always assure respondents about the confidentiality of the respondents and ensure that you will use the data for academic research also. So that is very important. You have to ensure that data collected from them will be used for academic research only. So research ethics is also very important. So you have to assure respondents about the confidentiality. You must not be, you should not reveal the actual respondents, details about the actual respondents. You have to keep confidentiality, though, so that is important. And data collected from them should be used only for academic research alone. Then always, I have already mentioned, always pre-test your questionnaire before administering it to respondents. So such a pre-testing is very important. So we can avoid all kinds of lack of clarity or biases by doing a pre-test. Then if you are sending questionnaires, ample writing space should be allowed to record open-ended questions. So writing space must be provided in the questionnaire, and language should be very simple, and I have already mentioned that. And questions must be very short, clearly worded, and active voice, that is important. Negative words should be avoided. Then you have to give all prescribed definitions and explanations that must be provided. So this ensures that the questions are handled consistently by all interviewers during the interview process. So you have to give all proper instructions. Then while framing the questions, tabulation plan should also be kept in mind. And sometimes you can ask indirect questions to get a correct reply. So in order to verify certain answers, you can ask some indirect questions also. Then questions should be within the information scope of the respondent. So you have to frame the questions in such a way that all these questions are within the information scope of the respondent. Respondent should be able to provide information. Other kind of questions should not be asked. Similarly, too many ideas should not be put into one question. For each question, there must be only a single answer. And the most important thing is that the researcher and his team should be able to win the confidence of the respondent by establishing good rapport with them. So if the researcher and his team can establish a good rapport with the respondents, then the research work will be very good. Respondents will freely interact with the team, and they will give all their responses. Always avoid annoying questions which are related to personal matters. Then that kind of questions must be avoided. And similarly, questions that put too much strain on the memory or intellect of the respondent must be avoided. Then always thank the respondent. Then see, words or concept involved in the question should be very clear, explicit. So you have to clarify all questions. Then questions having double meaning or a variety of interpretations you have to avoid. And always you have to thank the respondent for their participation and cooperation. You must be able to have a good rapport with the respondents, and you have to thank the respondents. You have to give proper instructions to them and thank the respondents for the participation and cooperation. So these are the important points that you have to remember while framing the questionnaire. So with this, I am stopping the presentation.